And with that, I'm happy to introduce Shira.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Thesis Rosenthal. Before I begin my presentation, I want to give just a big thank you to my committee. It's been a great year working with them. My chair, James Tillman, and the other members of my committee, Jana Vandergoot and Don Linebaugh. You guys have been amazing throughout the entire process, and of course, our thesis coordinator, Steve Hurt. I also just want to give a thank you to my parents and my brother for being amazingly supportive throughout this entire process. So I wanted to start off by telling you why I chose this topic. Obviously I have two big passions in life, horses and architecture. I love them both, and I wanted to do something that combined them both. Horses are a very big part of my life. I have a horse, I ride 6 to 7 times a week, I compete regularly. Riding is just a very big part of who I am. And I've always loved architecture. Ever since I was little, I would be driving around. I loved looking at houses and buildings and seeing how the building and the structure impacted what was going on inside. It always fascinated me. I decided in 9th grade, actually, that I wanted to pursue architecture after I built my first chipboard model of a little house. And my mom pointed out that my love of art and math, architecture is probably a great combination. So I will move forward with that. I found preservation when I came here for undergrad, and I really fell more in love with that when I went on a study abroad trip with Professor Linebaugh to England, and since then I've just absolutely loved it as well. So naturally, when I applied to the graduate school, I knew I wanted to apply for the dual degree. So I decided just to move forward with that, and I knew that's what I wanted to do with my career. So before I go forward, I wanted to ask everyone here, how many of you have actually ever been in a horse barn? Raise your hands. Awesome. How many of you have ever ridden a horse? Okay, awesome, that's great. So I'm sure most of you are very knowledgeable about architecture and preservation. I'm sure you know a little bit about horses. I wanted to give a little bit more background. Horses, obviously, they have a great, long, rich history. Originally, they were mostly used for transportation purposes. I'm blinded here. They were used for transportation purposes, then they started being used more for working companions on farms and plantations. So, this is my question, obviously, so take a step back. But how can historic preservation and sustainability come together to redesign a modern-day equestrian center? That is the question that I'm going to be answering. So when I started my research, I wanted to look at different farms and what the different practices they did. So the first one that I was looking at was Shelburne Estate. They have a breeding barn. It's in Vermont, owned by the Vanderbilt family. And I was looking at that. They are one of the oldest farms in the country to use horses as working companions. And I felt that I looked at them and wanted to see what the practices that they used. So after using them as working companions, horses transitioned to being used more for sport. And first, obviously, was horse racing. 1875, the first Kentucky Derby was run. And they began being used more for sport. And one of the oldest and most celebrated uses of horses in sport was dressage. And so what exactly is dressage, though? I'm not sure how many of you know exactly what it is. The definition of dressage is actually the art of riding and training a horse in a manner that develops obedience, flexibility, and balance. It is working with your horse to create a beautiful effect. The most common answer that I give when people ask me what dressage is it's a type of dance routine on a horse. And we have a test that we do. These are diagrams of the test I'm competing currently. And you follow the test and you get scored on how well you do it. And so I wanted to have a short video of me riding my horse Bear, so you can just get a little idea of what I do. So we're practicing some movements that you see in my dressage tests, 10-meter circles, 15-meter circles, 20-meter circles. And so these are movements that occur in my test. What I'm doing with my horse is I'm keeping him in his frame, which means that the front of his face is perpendicular to the ground. You want him to have his neck rounded. You can see just in the diagram in the corner is just what the movement that we're doing. He's listening very well to that. three gates in just in riding, just in case you don't know, is a track, walk, track, and canter. And at the end, beginning and end of a test, you halt and you do a salute to the judge. So dressage really is a centuries-old practice. The first dressage school was founded in 1532 in Naples, but the oldest and most famous dressage school, one of the oldest and most famous dressage schools in the world is the Spanish Riding School in Vienna. It was founded in 1565, but the white riding hall that you see in these images was built in 1729, and it has now actually become a very popular tourist attraction. People can actually come to the school and watch the training and performances of the Lipizan horses. It's a traditional riding school that they breed only Lipizan horses, and so you can watch, they put on performances with the stallions and you can watch them, and it's a very beautiful effect to see what the dressage, how they train these horses. So essentially classical dressage was established at this school. So when I was thinking about my question of how can I combine preservation and sustainability in a dressage farm, naturally I looked to the barn where I ride at. It's called Ready Meat Equestrian Center. It's located in Silver Spring, Maryland. It's about 25 minutes north of College Park. It sits on about 44 acres of land. The barn was built in 1984, but the land was actually purchased and developed in 1867. It sits within the Patuxent River watershed, and there are 3 buildings on the property that are had been there prior to when Ready Meat was created, and that I feel, as I was moving forward, was necessary to preserve. There's one building, the main house, was built in 1867 when the land was first purchased. It was the only house on the property. It's still in use today as a private residence for barn workers. There is a small storage building on the property that was built in 1938 when the property was used as a dairy farm. And then the other building that was built in 1938 was the cattle barn when it was used for a dairy farm. And we currently converted that to a boarding barn for the horses. And also on the property, there's the Thompson Lethbridge soapstone quarry, which is outlined right here. And that was documented in 1897, and the artifacts that they found indicate that it was used between 2500 and 500 BC. It is one of the only quarries, soapstone quarries in Maryland actually, that has not been damaged by commercial quarrying. So moving forward with my design, I felt that these iconic features of the site were very necessary to preserve and to honor as I moved forward with my design to make sure that it didn't disturb them. So as I moved forward with my research, what I wanted to look at first was a group of different barn precedents, both historic and modern, to create a barn typology study and figure out the best practices that I could use in my farm as moving forward with the design. So here's one of the farms that I looked at. It's Oak Haven Farm, located in Austin, Texas. It's done by Blackburn Architects. And then also Beechwood Stables in Weston, Massachusetts, which is also done by Blackburn Architects. By looking at these farms, I looked at a lot more. They gave me, I could have not only did research on what features I wanted to include in my barn, but it gave me lots of inspiration to see the feeling that these barns invoke and how I wanted to use that. So by looking at these, I figured out the features that were required and then also that I desired for my barn. There are 2 main essential parts of a barn that are necessary are obviously the stalls for the horses and the riding arena. Then I also felt it was very important because the equestrian community is a very tight-knit group. There's a lot of people in it. People stay at the barn and relax there and they socialize there. It's very important to have social spaces for people to be at the barn as well as just riding. So the 2 most important aspects in barn design are natural daylight and ventilation. The best way to keep horses happy and healthy is to keep them in an environment that's as close to their natural environment as possible. Horses can be very temperature sensitive. If they can overheat very easily, and that can cause illness for them and possibly death. So it's very important to keep them in a comfortable environment. So the first thing I wanted to look at is the best placement on the property and the orientation of my building to make sure that the stalls and the riding arena, the horses would never be in direct sunlight. So I did some sun studies to see where the sun would be in the peak hours of the day for the summer and the winter. And by doing this, I saw the sun paths and where the most shade was going to be coming from, and so I figured out that the best way to get light into the stalls without having light directly onto the horses was to have translucent skylights all along the north side of the stall wings, so that light was entering it and you can get the daylight, but none of the light was never directly onto the horses, making them too hot. There was also a great opportunity because the site, you can see in my site model, it's the flat area where the site is very open, and then the topography sits down, and there's not much tree coverage, so it's very open to the sun, so that gave me an opportunity to utilize solar paneling. And what I looked into and what I found was the most beneficial for my design was using seamless solar roof panels. You can see up top there flexible thin film photovoltaic solar modules that fit right into a standing seam metal roof. And this is beneficial because it takes away the bulk and look of a traditional solar panel, and it makes it more aesthetically appealing, but it still gives the power that you need for the entire barn and decreases energy usage. So that was something that I felt was very important for my design. Another aspect to consider with sunlight is that in the arena, you cannot have direct sunlight because as sun comes in, you can see just on the ground here, it creates sunspots, and horses can be afraid of those spots. They can spook at those, and that can cause injury to the horse and to the rider. So for that reason, in the arena, there are no skylights, but there are windows all along the edge. And these windows are a hanger style type window, as you can see in this section up here. And so the windows swing upwards and create an overhang on the outside so that the sun coming down is blocked by the overhang windows, so it's not causing sunspots on the ground, but it's still allowing the natural daylight to come inside. And having daylight in the ring is very important, as you need to be able to see while you're riding. I also felt it very important to diffuse the sunlight in the other spaces within my barn that the horses would be occupying, not only just their stalls and the riding arena, but where the cross ties are and the wash stalls, and this is the cross area where they come through. So in order to do that, in my center cupola, I designed clerestory windows on the very top, and then a truss system below that, so as the light is coming in, you can see up here actually in the different levels, the light is coming in, it gets diffused and bounced around, so that by the time it gets to the ground floor where the horses are, it is not going to be directly on them. It's not going to create any sunspots, and it won't be overheating them at all. So it still allows the natural light in, but it's not causing any of the issues. There's also side windows though on the cupola. You can see in my perspective up here, above the wash stall in the corner, so it still allows some light to come in under the second floor balcony. So that you still want light in the wash stall area so that there is natural light, it's not too dark, but that obviously will not be causing any harmful shadows. So the next very important design feature to consider for a barn is ventilation. Obviously, as I said, the horses can be very temperature sensitive, and they have very sensitive respiratory systems. So it's very important to have breezes coming and going and to make sure that the horses are as comfortable as possible. The first most important part of this is orienting the building on the site to take advantage of the prevailing summer breezes. So having the stalls and the arena be perpendicular to the south, southwest, southeast orientation is the best way to encourage that, and to have those breezes be flowing through and keeping the horses and the riders cool. And so exterior stall doors as well, as you can see right here, rather than just having windows on the outside of their stalls, having those doors allow the wind to come through the stalls all the way through the section, through the stalls to both sides of the stalls, and allow the horses to get that breeze. And then those exterior doors actually offer a second opportunity for egress, so that people can actually take the horses out there into the pasture. So adds a secondary benefit. Ridge venting on the roof of the stalls and the arena is also a very beneficial way to increase the circulation. Having vents along the floor, along with the ridge venting, encourages the chimney effect. which is basically having hot air pulled in low and then vented out high. So basically what is happening here is the body heat of horses, along with the heat of the sun on the roof and the skylight, creates a heat differential between the barn floor and the roof ridge. So as the heat rises, the Bernoulli effect helps move it along as the prevailing breeze blows across the roof. And that's by John Blackburn explaining what is happening there. So basically you want the air to come in, the hot air is the horses increase the hot air, and you want that to rise up out of the ridge vent and have the cool air come along perpendicular or parallel to the ground. So it's just creating constant ventilation within there so that the hot air from the horses is not staying stagnant. It's also very important, as I said, the respiratory systems of horses can be very sensitive, and having the dust from the hay, from the footing in their stalls, having the pathogens in the air can be very harmful, so you want that ventilation to be continuous so it's not just staying in the air, it needs to keep moving. The hangar windows in the arena also help with having cross ventilation as you're riding. So having air coming continuously through here is very important because when you're riding, obviously you and your horse are overheating. So you need to have that constant airflow. So another big issue that I ran into on this site and that offered some great opportunities was for water drainage. As you can see from my site model, and as I explained, the water drainage, because the topography slopes downwards, there is a lot of times water generally comes down here and pools in this area. It'll basically flow down here and get stuck, and they'll create different pools around there, and it creates gullies through the fields. It's actually created some pretty deep gullies over time, especially in our area, in Maryland area. The rainwater can be excessive, as we've seen certain times in the last couple months. So I thought this was a great opportunity to create a water filtration system on this site, because not only is there abundant water and there's drainage issues, but a horse barn is something that requires a lot of water. Not only need to water the horses for drinking, the arena needs to be watered because the footing, which is usually a dust-sand type mixture, as you're riding, the horses kick up the dust, and the dust can be then rises into the air. It can become hard to see, and then it's also hard to breathe both for the rider and for the horses. So watering the arena is actually a very common thing multiple times a day. So having extra water usage is very good for that. So I wanted to create a water filtration system on the southern end of my site and this would allow the opportunity within the landscaping and the pastures to create retention ponds and different sites around the building, and then have underground pipes and then additionally gutters on the roof line leading the rainwater to this site. And then water could enter into the pretreatment tank and then go into the filtration tank to be purified, and then it can be serviced back up to the building. And in this case, for efficiency, an overhead watering system for the stalls so in one central space you can turn the water on and it would run through hoses to each of the stalls. For a barn that's 70 plus horses, that is it's much more efficient, it's very useful. And then having an overhead watering system for the ring is also much more efficient rather than having someone come in with a hose and water the entire ring, which can be very time consuming and also hazardous with the hose running around and the horses might trip on it. So as I was looking at different design aspects and looking more into detail, another thing that I was looking at was the materiality and how I could use materials and the opportunities I had to use different sustainable resources to improve my barn. So I looked at a bunch of different materials that I wanted to utilize to help make my barn more energy efficient, more sustainable. The first of which was granite crete. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right, but it is a material that looks and feels like crushed organic surface, but it has a strength and erosion control of concrete. It's a very porous material, it has great erosion control, and it's made of recycled material, so it can be reused, and it also has 13 points in 3 categories of the LEED rating system. So you can see a section of that, and so I used that for the driveway and the exterior pathways leading up to my barn. Right now, on the existing site, that is just a dirt path. Driving down that again kicks up the dust, and that can make bad air quality for the horses walking around, and it can also spook the horses. So this material will be much more beneficial. For my stall wings, I wanted to go with a concrete masonry construction with limestone base on the exterior and fiber cement siding on the exterior. The concrete masonry construction I felt was the best choice because it is much less maintenance and it's easier upkeep. Obviously in a horse barn there's a lot of upkeep, so decreasing that as much as possible is always a good thing. Concrete masonry can be recycled for other projects, and it reduces energy usage because the temperature control inside is greater. Excuse me. It also, so it keeps the temperature the same, and it optimizes the indoor air quality because it doesn't require much paints and adhesives. The limestone base material I thought was not only aesthetically pleasing for the exterior, but it can be used for this type of base because it's low permeability, so it keeps the water out, and it's a lot less maintenance than other materials, but it's very long lasting. And so I wanted to use the soapstone. Instead, I decided to use that in the interior, as soapstone is not great for exterior usage. It's not ideal for exterior usage as it requires more maintenance, and it can chip easily, and it weathers, and it's a little bit more expensive. But to pay homage to the soapstone quarry that's on my property, I wanted to use that in the interior for aesthetics, so I used it as a circular centerpiece in my cupola on the ground floor, just as interior paving, so that there is a connection to what's on the site. So I did have that. I wanted to keep that. It was very important to me, but to use it in the proper place. For the exterior, the fiber cement siding was the best choice because it's very long-lasting material. It's rot, fiber, and insect-proof, and has warranties from 30 to 50 years. So it's very easy to maintain. And then for the flooring, where the horses are going to be walking, I chose the True Step pavers, which is a specially designed flooring for horses. They are interlocking rubber pavers. They're long-lasting. They are self-draining and slip-resistant, and they are both shock and sound-absorbent, which the horses will greatly appreciate. The horses have very sensitive structural systems, so that will be very useful. They're also chemical, abrasion, weather resistant. So these pavers I felt were a very good choice for the barn. So as I was saying, the equestrian community is a very special group. It's a very close-knit group. Once you start riding, you start to know everybody. So I wanted to make this barn a place for riders, not only just the riders, but their family, their friends, and the public to come. I wanted it to be a place that people felt welcome. I feel like my barn is my family, and I wanted people to be able to experience that. Even if they're not riding, you should be able to experience a place like this in a way so you could see the riding and you can see what you can do with the horses. I wanted people to be able to see the connection that horses and humans can have. It's a very special partnership, and I mean, it's an amazingly special partnership that everyone should be able to experience, even if they're not riding. And a barn like this is a perfect place to encourage that and to encourage people to somehow get involved with this type of experience. It's fun for people even if they're not riding. So I wanted people to be able to do that. And so creating the social spaces like the lounges at the front and at the front of the barn, on the second floor, the balcony area where you can look down into the stalls, look down into the center where the wash stalls are, and then the observation deck in the arena so they can watch the riding. So there's many places that even if they're not riding, you can still enjoy the space and see what is happening. I thought a possible next phase of this project would be that to create a specific space within the excuse me, within the building that was an environment to educate people on horses and what you can do with horses, and then further educate people on the extent of the site and what you could possibly do with the landscaping and the agricultural aspects, because there's so much more that you could do that a horse barn has and you could experience with it. So I thought moving forward, that would be a great next phase to look forward into this project. So I'm going to take you a quick walk, just a run through of my barn, how you might experience it. with that, thank you all for
Sure,
listening.
before you invite us to comment, you might describe, you might describe just where those buildings are on the site and
Oh, yes.
the fundamental decision about where to locate the barn and its orientation.
Okay, so these buildings, this main house is the building right here. And this shed is right up here. It's a little cut off, but it's along the driveway entrance. It's not really utilized right now. It's just still standing there. And this barn is the upper barn, and that is right here. And I decided to put the barn in this location mainly because this footprint is where the existing barn is. When in 1984, when they created Ready Made, they flagged out this area and brought in the structure actually, and that placed it. And I decided that I didn't want to disturb the footprint of the property anymore by cutting into the topography. I wanted to stay within this area just so I could preserve the property, the land as much as possible. So I stayed within the area, but just changed the orientation a little bit.
Is this all new construction?
Yes, so everything within here is new construction. The old barn that's existing, not only was it deteriorating a little bit, but it was not exactly functional based on everything that I've said. The stalls were not great, the arena was not great, it did not follow regulations. So I decided rather than trying to fix that, because it wasn't a historic feature and it wasn't something I felt like I needed to preserve, just to start new. Yes.
What's the trapezoidal room upon entry there? I see the bathrooms, but what's that?
This right here
Yeah, what is that?
is the office.
That's it.
Just because it is a place for lessons and everything, you need a place for the farm manager to organize payments and people coming in.
Could you walk us through the floor plan?
Yes, absolutely.
It seems to me like there are specific areas here in terms of getting horses ready and so on to perform. Can you show us how that all works?
Yes. So on the first floor, obviously this is the main entrance that you see as you come down the driveway. This is more of the administrative wing. There's bathrooms, the office, and this is a tack room. So obviously for the horses, each horse has its own saddle, its own bridle, so you need abundant space to have that. So the tack room is right there, and then the steps leading up to the second floor. But as you come in here into the center area, these four are wash stalls. It's a lot of times after you ride, the horse is very sweaty. It's very important to cool it off. So having wash stalls there is a very important feature. And so then these two wings are the stalls for the horses with feeding rooms, medication rooms, and then on each end there's storage for hay and for bedding for the stalls. Those are two at the end. And then coming through here, this connection to the arena, these are cross ties. So you put your horse in there and you can tie them up in there, you can groom them, and then you can tack them up. And it's sort of a holding area for the horses. So if you put them there, you can go get your tack, you can come back. Most horses will stand a cross tie for as long as you need them to, and they will be perfectly fine with it. And then they can come into the arena. I designed this with a door from the courtyard in and then also out for the purpose of services such as a farrier. When they come in, they can drive around and enter here and do the horse's feet here without having to come in through the public entrance. And so then having the main riding arena here, on this end there is a judge's booth. So if you have competitions, the judge sits at C and looks down on the test, and that's how they judge. And so moving on to the second floor, there's a balcony here that overlooks that main entrance. I wanted you to be able to look into the truss structure on each of the wings. And then this second floor was meant to be a very special space, having this balcony where you can look down into the center and then down through the windows, as you can see, into the barn, and so where the horses are. So you can be really seeing what's happening from the second floor all around you. You can see sort of behind the scenes what's going on. And then you transition into the lounge space, which for riders in between rides, they might want to sit down and relax. For parents waiting for their kids to finish a lesson, there's a place for them to sit. So there's a lot of downtime a lot of times, and you need a place to sit and relax. And then that opens up into the observation deck that is fully enclosed for winter months. because it can get very cold, and I know as parents don't want to be sitting watching their children ride in a cold arena. So having this enclosed with glass is just provides a warm space for the parents to look down and watch what is going on in the arena. And we have exterior wash stalls here. Having an abundant amount of wash stalls is very important. Just coming from a barn with so many horses, when a bunch of people need to use it at once and your horse is very hot and there's people in the wash stall, it's not very, it's conducive. So having multiple wash stalls is important.
I might have missed it. I know the general southwest orientation for southern breezes, but specifically the difference between the barn and the stables, and how you made a decision about those orientations.
Yeah, so it's most important to have the breezes for the stalls because that's where the horses spend most of the time if they're not outside. So having them, it doesn't not necessarily facing completely perpendicular to the southern winds, but because of this open area, this orientation allows them to get that breeze, but it also is conducive for that sunlight, so they're not getting baked in the sun with the northern skylights. Having the arena this way allowed for that southwest breeze as well. So it didn't have to be completely perpendicular to the summer breezes, but it allows it for a little bit of exposure.
But was the decision to not have those normal to one another driven by any particular environmental issue or spatial or composition?
Mostly for the stalls and for this part of the barn, I wanted, as you're coming in, to be able to see that entrance. So I wanted that to be tilted a little bit more this way, and then I wanted to create this courtyard. So tilting it that way just opened that up and allowed a little bit more space there.
So composition.
Yeah, so that was mostly the reason.
But is it common to enter the big arena on the long side in the middle? Or, in other words,
Right here?
yeah, is that traditionally how it's done for a specific reason?
It can be done either way. There's actually.
You can enter the short end.
You can enter the short way, yeah.
Doesn't matter which you enter in the middle of the arena.
Nope.
And I'm assuming the tan is parking?
Yeah, so this is all parking, pathways. Right now there's just a hill and people just park along here. So allowing this space just to open up for parking and then for people walking horses around. So pathway and parking.
And the dark, long, linear piece on the northwest edge of the park? What is that?
Right here?
Well, actually both I wanted to know.
This is an outdoor ring.
That's an outdoor.
An outdoor ring.
So that's
Yeah.
equivalent.
So it's equivalent to where the jumps are right there.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it just relocated. It's basically used if it is a nice day, you can ride outside, or if there's a competition, you need somewhere to warm up, and then you can come in to compete. So there needs to be multiple rings. So that having an outdoor ring is always nice, especially if there's nice weather. It's nice to be outside. This right here, as you can, let me see this. So you can sort of see in the perspective, but that spot right there, actually, that's a steep model, is a very steep incline hill that goes from that flat piece that was flattened out originally, and it goes up the hill. So right now it's just a steep downward hill. So I wanted to create some sort of bank that blocked it off. So with stone and wood, I just created some flower beds just so that there is some sort of distinction. It's not just a hill running there. And the horses try to walk up there, that can be a little dangerous.
And so what's the balance of your inscription? I mean, I can see you delineated it, that is the rectangle that wraps all this up, and I understand that piece. What's the other, as you go around the other three edges, what is that fine line that delineates that? And
That is essentially where the topography starts to go down.
so is that a retaining wall?
It is not a retaining wall. It is, when they came in 1984 to create it, they basically flattened out that whole land. So that's just the flat footprint. And then once you get to the other side of that, the hill, it just starts to go down on either side. So they basically came in and flattened out this area and put the building there. And then there's nothing on either side to block it. There's no retaining wall. It just slopes down.
But you have delineated it somehow, at least I see it both in the plan and there.
Yes, I would like to delineate it with mostly with fencing and maybe some landscaping just to show where the change is. And there also are pastures that begin there, so there's fencing there that shows where that ends.
So well, I was just going to ask, any other exterior programming, grazing, riding, anything else that occurs here that might be part of your larger?
So all around here, there are existing pastures. There's fencing that indicates where the pastures are. I think a next phase of the project would have been to look more into the landscaping and fencing, and I think that because there's great opportunities there. But right now, all of this space that is owned by the farm is used for our paddocks and pastures that are cut with fences.
If I'm coming as a visitor to watch an event, I go up to the second floor.
You can go up to the second floor, or you can come into this observation booth. But yeah, so if the public is coming in, the idea is they come in through this courtyard. They don't have to go through the barn, and they can enter through here. All along here, as you can see in the perspective, you can stand there and watch, or you can go up to the second floor
So
observation
the
deck.
second floor one is enclosed like a press box. Is
It
there a
is-
functional reason for that?
For if it's in the winter months, there needs to be a warm place for people to watch.
The program, how do you come up with the number of horses? Is there like because you said your passion to find the balance between horses and sustainability. So how do you come up with the definitions? How many horses do you need if it's sustainable to this site?
The ideal number, just from my research, that looking at different horse barns, is usually a 24 stall barn that is makes it just, it's a nice equivalent amount of stalls on either side. Obviously, ready-made right now we have about 70 horses, so you can have any number. There really isn't a magic number.
How was that? How many now?
70.
So I missed something. I thought 24 stalls here.
I decreased it by a lot. Right, and so we have 70 stalls right now. The existing barn, you can see right here, the stalls go all the way down here. And then there's the stalls here and in the upper barn.
It went from a courtyard area to high.
But is there a ratio of how many, in your research, that a horse needs that much pasture and that's why a 24 horse?
That's honestly, it's an opinion. Many people have different opinions about that. That also comes down to stall size. The ideal stall size is around 12 feet by 12 feet. At our barn right now, we have probably about 15 stalls that are much smaller than that, or more pony size. And those aren't ideal. For ponies, they're okay, but they create the condition if they're too narrow that a horse can cast themselves, which when they lay down, they can roll over and get their feet stuck against the wall and they can't roll themselves back. So having bigger stalls, it makes that a little less likely. It's just a little bit safer. So with the ideal stall size and then fitting into this building on the property, it comes out to about 24.
How many staff are you looking at, and what are you looking at as program for your the historic buildings inside?
So the historic buildings, the main house, which is right here, is a private residence for workers. The farm employs stall workers, feeders, so they house some of them there. And then the little building, which is this one, is just extra storage for tractors. There's not really any use for that. And then this barn, which was the cattle barn originally, is now another boarding barn. So we have 10 stalls up there that are for boarders separately. In the main barn right now, we have mostly horses that are owned by the barn and they're used for lessons. So they belong to the barn, they're used in the lesson program. The barn up here is a boarding barn. I keep my horse in one of the boarding barns.
Anything extent of the soapstone quarry?
Anything, excuse me?
Anything that indicates the presence of that quarry?
No, you actually don't know it's there
Only
unless
by
you...
research?
Yeah, I did that entirely by research. I talked to the owners that created Ready Made, and then on the Smithsonian website, I found some information, but if you don't know it's there, you can't see it at all. It's covered.
Generally, we don't like to mark archaeological sites because it sort of points to people that might do bad things to them. And so we kind of leave them non-delineated.
I wonder if there might be an opportunity though, because it's a rather small population that's actually out riding around the site. And one of the joys, I think, of a horse barn with land is that you can take some trail rides. So I'm just I mean, I understand you've accomplished a huge amount on this project, but I do think a great opportunity would be to engage more directly with the landscape. And just for a couple of suggestions, one is you've preserved structures on the site, but I think you haven't gone so far as to give us a kind of procession through history, to really describe that kind of approach to the farm, the drive-in, and then how you might take the horses on a trail ride that might take you around the history of the site. So, of course I wish you had another 7 months to stay with us.
Exactly.
If
That was my thought exactly.
So that's one thing. Another is the actual approach to the barn, and it's such a beautifully symmetrical arrangement that I just keep wishing, maybe there's an ecological reason not to, but I keep wishing that the entrance had been here and that you'd given us a procession that took you in. Then you could have taken the stalls and arrayed them similarly on both sides so that that experience of, going to get your horse and bringing it out, everyone would kind of come from the two sides and the center.
Yeah.
So that's one thing. And just one more opportunity. I think part of the experience of the barn is when the farrier comes and practices the blacksmithing craft. And you showed us these trusses that you designed so beautifully. And I wish that there had been sort of blacksmithing details, pieces of iron that join those trusses. And
You can see
I
a
know
little
that
of
you've got some iron
perspective.
railings, you've got iron grates on the stall doors and so forth. So I'm just looking for a kind of celebration of that blacksmithing craft as part of the history of riding. It might have sort of found a place in the architecture.
I guess one of the other things too is, it seems to me like the stable areas, the cruciform building has received significantly more attention than the barn itself. When I look at those renderings there of that space and the intimacy of the trusses and the spacing of it, and then I look at the equivalent drawing there.
Of the
I wonder-
arena?
Yeah, I wonder about the pitch, I wonder about the actual architecture being a lot less robust there. It seems a little bit less, it seems much more utilitarian and less celebrated as a place than some of the stalls do. And even the way it sits on the site, the way that I can't quite figure out how the cruciform-shaped building hits the wall of the barn and what that angle really produces in terms of architecture. I understand it functionally, and I understand the spaces that need to be near it, and the viewing and things like that. I just don't know why it sits right there. And the rotation, I understand the rotation perhaps for maybe site reasons and ventilation reasons, it just seems to produce an awkward relationship between the barn and the stable area, or something that could have been capitalized on. That whole procession through that threshold of the barn, either I want the wall of the cruciform building to be much more open so I can see into that space more dramatically, or be some sense that there is this threshold I'm passing through from one realm to the other, the preparation, the sleeping, and the work side versus the show side. It seems like that line is a real opportunity that could have been celebrated a lot more.
Okay, I can answer a few of those questions. One of the main reasons that I did this in that way is, for one, a lot of barns that I looked at, and the best way is actually to have the barn detached from the stalls, mostly for sound control reasons. As you're riding, if it's attached to the stalls, a lot of sound can transfer. That can scare the horses. In the existing barn, it's right up against all the stalls. As horses are kicking the stalls, it makes a lot of sound. But having it detached, then in bad weather, it makes it difficult to go from the arena to the stalls. So having this connection was basically to have a pathway to go from the stalls to the arena, but I didn't want it to be this big, wide space, because it really was just that. It was a connection between the stalls and the arena. It wasn't supposed to be a big place, and I didn't want it also to create something similar to what was there, that if I made it wider, it's made it seem like it was just one big structure. I wanted it to be actually
Sure,
two
I
separate.
understand all that. I guess my question is the architectural language. gets handled. I understand all these functional constraints. It seems not studied, that threshold there between those two realms. And I can appreciate the acoustic reasons and separation. And I think you probably, from a kind of functional point of view, have solved that aspect. For me, it's what's that experience like, and how do those two geometries form each other?
I think what, oh yeah, go ahead.
And bringing together Nadia's very good points and Matt's very good points. I mean, I think this opportunity that Nadia described to lead people through the site and then kind of historical narrative that describes this tradition, this ongoing tradition of writing, which you analyzed very evocatively in terms of the movements and the installation and so forth, could have an effect, an impact on this design of a series of spaces, not only buildings, but buildings that shape those spaces. Because what we're seeing there, and I think this might be part of what it's getting to, is that it's not like the threshold problem, is that cruciform shape is breaking up, it's something that's crowded inside, and it's not making a clear sequence of spaces. Right? So we kind of expanded that whole partie a little bit more generously in buildings that actually took you through the site on this kind of historical sequence. I think it would be a much more greater opportunity to make both space and architecture.
Yeah, I mean, I think these are all really good points, and they're part of the conversation also about, when you do dressage, you go through a series of diagrams. It's this choreographed, almost like a ballet, right?
Yes.
And so what you really want to do is inspire the visitors to also go through, almost like a ballet or a dance when they're coming in. So one of your moves to make the circular cupola was to get the people to kind of walk in the circle to experience the radius. And I think what I'm hearing from the other reviewers is that, this situating the building so that the experience of the courtyard is also a dance, the entry, all of these pieces that make the promenade really need, to be studied very carefully so that the user is almost doing the same thing that you're doing.
Yeah, I can definitely appreciate that.
On another note, you did talk about a lot of sustainability. I just want to add one more opportunity, which is water. Because you did say horses need a lot of water. Did you attempt or incorporate some kind of conservation of water?
Yeah, I have. I wanted to incorporate a water filtration system to collect the rainwater from the
Is
roof.
that?
So right up here.
So where does that go in the pit?
Right.
Okay, so it's not where.
So it's underground though.
I understand. So
Okay.
when they get washed up there, all those pipes are going to be leading up there.
Mhm.
Okay. What about rainwater?
Rainwater can direct it to that site with gutters and then lead it down into the filtration tank.
So that will be another opportunity to help with your architecture, like emphasize in your architecture the downspout to help you in the next phase as you add up your
Yeah.
I know what you mean.
This is a fascinating problem in the sense of almost acute care for the horses because of the particular qualities. I'm assuming these are all thoroughbreds.
No.
Oh, so they're
They could be. We have a little Welsh mini pony right now, up to warm bloods and thoroughbreds. My horse is a thoroughbred. We have all sorts of breeds.
because you talk a lot about the whole issue of temperature control, of really acute care in the sense of the health of the horse, including even how you water down the surface and so on. I want to come back to Mac's question. To me, this is theater, in a sense, and the whole idea of procession and where you have front of house and back of house and how all of that works together to make the public experience one that is a celebration, as well as the private one, which is the care of the horse, and how those two meet together. And so for me, the crux of it is right in this connection between the cupola and the barn, and how all of that fits together, and how the viewers both react, work down at the lower level as well as the upper level. In a sense, it's almost like you're setting up the theater to react to this. also trying to come to grips too with how this cruciform form meets the barn and so on. And some lost opportunities in that sense to make that really selling in that whole aspect. But coming back to the building performance, I spent a lot of time on wind and how all of that is. So, had you explored passive house kinds of ways to look at this in the sense of how you can use natural ventilation and mass and so on to achieve the results of using sort of these more traditional forms? I'm just wondering whether or not, because the construction and the materials you use look like fairly standard construction in that sense. And I was wondering in your research, is there an ideal way of housing horses? And in the sense in the private area of the composition.
Do you mean form-wise?
Form-wise as well as structure, as well as mass and all of the other kinds of things that go into the architecture, the light, etc. Because in a sense, I think there's, with the celebration of the structure that you use throughout this, there are ways to light this differently than just windows on the sides. You begin to think about how you use infrared light and so on, like shelves and all kinds of things to really increase the experiential quality of the space for both the horses as well as the non-shadow environment and how to achieve that. Because as soon as you put windows on the side, you've got to then deal with the sun movement and so on, and how that is effectively, in the sense you said the horses would spook if there's a bright spot and so on. So you really want indirect light, basically, is what that's saying. And how all of that could be incorporated into the just a lot of
more to think about.
One of my difficult tasks is keeping us roughly on schedule. I do know that Michael wanted to say one. No, you in the hole?
No.
Okay, the other part here is the committee was chaired by Jamie Tillman here and shared by Donna Vandergood, who got up a minute ago and raised some comments. And Don Linebaugh, I already introduced at the beginning. As chair, you wanted to say something?
Yes,
before
I
wrap this up?
would. One of the really intriguing things about this thesis project was getting to know equestrian culture. I grew up in New Hampshire, so I had some exposure to it, but really understanding it. And about halfway through the semester, we really came across these diagrams here, the dressage diagrams, the discipline of that, the forms of that. And that really did enter the conversation quite distinctly in terms of the development of the building. One thing I think you didn't take us through the typical visitor coming into the building at the end of the plan and coming up into the cupola space and across to the barn. And as you can see in the upper perspectives, the delineation of the circle, the releasing of the circle, and the marking of the circle as a complete form was a very powerful reference, I think, to this sequence, and something that you and the committee spent quite a bit of time thinking about the articulation of it as the culminating event, really, of the sequence. And I think you've captured it really quite well in the upper two perspectives that we haven't talked about a lot. But so that idea of movement through space, while I think it's true, could make its way out into the environment, absolutely, and could gain richness, particularly in the entry sequence. But the internal building dynamics and sequences, you spent a lot of time thinking about that and developing that, and I would like to call your attention to it.
I think it was really neat that a number of the comments followed on our committee with Sharon through the development of this whole project. Like you, we wish that other things that also attended to at the level to which he attended to the horses. Clearly, if there were issues and questions about architecture versus horses, it was really clear where Shira stood. As I'm sure you could pick up from the conversation. I never expected, I know a little bit more about Shira than I did at the beginning of the semester. I know a hell of a lot more about horses. Shira, thank you very much.